Welcome back. If you so much as blinked this week, you missed what in ordinary times would be monumental events, raucous confirmation hearings for a Supreme Court nominee who may well end up tipping the scale of the U.S. Supreme Court, overshadowed by an unbelievable anonymous op-ed in the New York Times by a senior aide to President Trump claiming they and others are protecting the nation from him. The president calls it treason and demands a search for the person responsible, and President Obama, after calling out the politics of fear and resentment at John McCain's funeral, names names today, and the name is Trump. Joining us for more is Jeff Weaver, the 2016 presidential campaign manager for Senator Bernie Sanders, and welcome to the Suncoast.
Well, happy to be here.
You wrote a book about how Bernie won, which obviously he did and didn't, because he didn't win the nomination, but he really did light a fire under progressive Democrats in Florida and around the country that has not been done before.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And, you know, if you look at the issues that are talked about now in politics, issues like Medicare for All, about raising the minimum wage to $15, free tuition at public colleges and universities, you know, criminal justice reform, immigration reform, you know, these are issues that were considered on the fringe of politics before Bernie Sanders ran for president. But he demonstrated the broad-based support for these initiatives, not just among Democrats, but also among independent voters who in most states can participate in the Democratic primary process.
If there's one thing that you would say to voters and our viewers here on the Suncoast, which is a heavily Republican area, heavily conservative, the Democratic Party has not won a lot around here. That may be changing. We had the special election for the State House a couple months ago where the Democrat won. But Democrats are motivated as we go into the midterms, but Republicans are confident that they're going to hold on to their seats. So what is the one thing that you would tell people on either side of the fence and those in the middle?
Well, look, I would say this. You have to talk to your neighbors. You know, too often in American politics these days we end up in our own silos where we only talk to people who think just like we do. We need to break out of that and start talking to our neighbors about the common aspirations that all Americans have. You know, it's funny when you poll people regardless of their political affiliation, their race, their geography, their gender, their sexual orientation, you know, and the issues, what they want out of life is very, very similar. You know, they want a decent economic life for their family. They want to live in social dignity. They don't want to worry about the risk of being bankrupted by a health issue. They want their kids to have a good education. They want to know how they're going to pay to take care of their aging parents. Like it is so amazing when you look at the commonality of what Americans are trying to achieve. And I think when we talk to our neighbors who choose to have voted Republican in the past, you know, we have to explain to them about what a progressive agenda looks like, how it's going to benefit all Americans, and how really the Republican Party, certainly in its current incarnation, which I think even many Republicans are concerned about, you know, has become increasingly a party that caters to the interests of very, very wealthy people at the expense of middle-income people, and preys on the cohesiveness of our society by spreading politics of division and hatred based on religion and race and other things.
But if you read our viewer comments, many times it gets down to this. We moved down to this area to escape the Northeast, where there are a lot of states with higher taxes. We don't want to pay more. We like it in Florida because there are less taxes here, and the perception is Democrats get in, they're going to turn this into a high-tax, socialistic state.
Yeah. Well, I'm confident that that's not going to happen. But look, I would say this. You know, take an issue like Medicare for All, for instance, which recently, in recent polls, is supported by 80% of Democrats, 52% of Republicans, you know, an amazing statistic. You know, it is a way of dealing with a significant problem in this country, which is people cannot afford the high cost of health care. Premiums are too high, deductibles are too high, copays are too high, and the cost of prescription drugs is through the roof, right? So by moving to a Medicare for All system, we will, in fact, cover everybody at lower cost because we can wring out the bureaucratic excesses caused by the insurance companies and the overcharging that we're getting from the pharmaceutical companies and others. That makes perfect sense, certainly to business people and to conservatives, you know, who want an efficient delivery of a necessary service.
Our conversation on the Week in Washington continues. Welcome back. If you're just tuning in, we are joined by political campaign manager of the 2016 campaign for Bernie Sanders, Jeff Weaver. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Let's talk about what's happening now. You know, we had, as I said at the outset, a pretty momentous week, as you know most weeks are these days. What did you make of the op-ed piece that was in the New York Times? Because on one hand, it seems incredible, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, but there is a lot of criticism that if an individual is going to say that, they should put their name to it.
Right. So let me say this. Clearly, sort of unprecedented occurrence. I worked on Capitol Hill for 14 years in the Congress. You would never have heard about anything like this. Generally, if you disagree with the person you work for, to a significant degree, you leave your position and you may or may not say something publicly. That's obviously up to you. So this is really unprecedented. I think it exposes really the dysfunction within this White House. On the other hand, I think that there is some justification to those who say that, if you're going to write this, you should have your name on it so that readers can judge for themselves based on the motivations of who it is about how valid they believe the writing is. So I think there's truth to both sides, but I think it is a very concerning occurrence in the sense that you have the most powerful person in the world in the White House in the form of the president, who has a tremendous impact on our economy, with a few words can tank markets, who has access to weapons of mass destruction, and to have such dysfunction within that place is pretty disturbing.
President Obama took on Donald Trump for the first time using his name today in a speech in Illinois, but he also took on both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, and I want to talk to you for a moment about what's going on in the Democratic Party right now. Since the campaign that you ran, there is progressives have really stepped up in terms of their involvement in trying to get progressives elected to office, but that also has meant some kind of clash between people who have been in the Democratic Party all this time and people who are new to it. President Obama took on that very issue today, and let's take a look at what he said.
Sure.
You cannot sit back and wait for a savior. You can't opt out because you don't feel sufficiently inspired by this or that particular candidate. This is not a rock concert. This is not Coachella. We don't need a messiah. All we need are decent, honest, hard-working people who are accountable and who have America's best interests at heart.
I think you know who he's talking about, because there were a lot of people who supported Bernie Sanders that after the nomination, despite the fact that the senator himself told people to vote for Hillary Clinton, they stood on the sidelines and they did not vote, or they voted third party. What would you say to people like that? And there are a lot of them around here.
Yeah, well, and I worked also, as a volunteer, very hard to elect Secretary Clinton in the general election. I was on TV quite a bit and was a surrogate for her at one of the debates. Look, the truth of the matter is that more of Hillary Clinton's supporters in 2008 defected to McCain and did not vote for President Obama than was the case in 2016 with Bernie supporters. So, I hear the criticism. It's not sort of borne out historically in terms of the numbers, but I will say this. Look, a political party is like a church in some ways. If you're a preacher with no congregation, you have no church. You're just a person speaking into the wind. And a party that doesn't speak to people, that doesn't inspire people, that doesn't cause people to be motivated to come out and support it, just has no relevance in people's lives. And so the greatest challenge for political institutions is to be relevant. And to do that, you need to articulate a message, and you're seeing it in race after race across this country. Here in Florida with Andrew Gillum, somebody who stands unabashedly with working class people and middle class people, excites young people, brings together people as opposed to tearing communities apart. And that's the key to winning. And I understand that, it's a new way of thinking relatively in the Democratic Party, but it's really the old way of thinking. This is what FDR did in the 40s.
But would you be concerned that the Democrats could do what some Republicans are concerned about doing, that if you were not all in on Trump, you're not considered a real Republican, and in the minds of some progressives, if you're not all in there, look, we have a two-party system in this country. The way we're set up is,
it leads us to a two-party system. Other countries have multi-party, ideologically homogenous parties. We're just not set up that way. So both parties are necessarily a coalition of sorts. The question is, what is the dominant message within that coalition, and what is the most effective way for Democrats to win? Because both parties are minority parties in this country. Neither has 50% of the population. You need independent voters, and it is increasingly clear that independent voters support bold progressive messaging.
Okay, Jeff Weaver, thank you very much,
Thank
and
you.
good luck to you. We want to thank political staffer Jeff Weaver, who ran Bernie Sanders' campaign, for joining us. Coming up next, our discussion on the week in Washington continues. In just a moment, the Manatee Democratic Chair, Cheryl Wilson, is here, along with Martin Hyde of the Sarasota Republican Party. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are talking about the week in Washington, and joining us for more are Manatee County Democratic Chair Cheryl Wilson and Martin Hyde of the Sarasota Republican Party. So let's continue the conversation about the events with President Trump this week. The op-ed, the anonymous op-ed from somebody supposedly inside the White House saying that there is a secret society protecting the country from the president. And I'm wondering what you all are thinking about this on a local level. But let's start with what the president told a group about this last night.
The latest act of resistance is the op-ed published in the failing New York Times by an anonymous, gutless coward. Is it subversion? Is it treason? It's a horrible thing.
Martin, is this subversion? Is it treason?
I don't know about treason. It's a good story. It's a hell of a good story.
Well, I mean, it's a good story, but I mean, on one hand, you could say it should scare us to death. If there is somebody who, and a group of people preventing the president from doing certain things in the White House, they're not elected by anyone.
Oh, absolutely. And if there's any truth to it, a true patriot would come out and own it, because when it comes down to it, that would be a serious matter. If he's really a Looney Tunes, as someone is implying that he is, then they should come out and they should own it. Because as it stands at the moment, you've seen all the statements the people that have made that have said it wasn't me, it wasn't me, it wasn't me. We're now down to a guessing game of who it was. By definition, unless people are lying about it, it's now one of the backbench type players.
We don't know who it was, but
it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who it is. We've seen that the people who are tasked with keeping Donald Trump in line aren't able to do it. General Kelly is supposed to be able to keep control. Reince Priebus was supposed to be able to at least have some influence on it. So it doesn't matter whether the person is known or unknown. They're unable to keep Donald Trump in line. Do I have respect for someone who speaks quietly and anonymously, and I can say the word? No. But if we are depending, if we're finding any comfort in the fact that there's a small group who may be doing that, we're misleading ourselves, because they're not going to be effective.
Of course, this comes in the backdrop of the book by Bob Woodward of Watergate fame, which is coming out on Tuesday. And Martin, he is one person that it's very difficult to say that this is a Omarosa book or the other book that came out before this. This is probably the most respected investigative reporter who has written books, honest books, and sometimes negative books about Obama and Bush, every president since Nixon, and he's painting a very concerning picture about this president and what is going on in the White House.
I think the presumption of people where they're saying that we have to save the president from himself, exactly what is it that they claim that he's about to do? Push the button, turn the key, say something, tweet something? What specifically? And frankly, who are they? He's the president of the United States. If he does something egregious, the people will judge him.
Cheryl?
There are people in place who need to be acting. There's Congress of the United States. There's a judicial department in the government. That's a relationship that we could pursue as well. But the people who are charged with taking some steps are the people that aren't doing it. I agree. The staffer or the high-ranking administration official, that's not his job. His job isn't to take papers off the desk of the President of the United States. But there are people who are authorized to step in, and those are the people that are failing
You know,
us.
here's the bottom line. According to a new CNN ORC poll, only 15% of Americans say they trust the government in Washington. This is
Well,
the
I'd
government.
like to know who the 15% are. I mean, that's not new, Alan. I mean, that's something been around a long time.
It is new because the all-time previous low was 17%.
Okay.
Where obviously, this new administration came in to drain the swamp and get things done, and you got a tax bill through this year, a lot of rollbacks of regulation, but it doesn't seem that a lot else is getting done in Washington.
There's unintended consequence of this world that we live in. We're adapting to it. The social media, the polarization, the opposite ends of both parties. I'm not terribly surprised that people are turned off by it, because all that one ever hears is how bad each of them are, and very little conversation about actual policy. You mentioned one policy. We should be talking about policy all the time.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about the governor's race. The field is set. Andrew Gillum against Ron DeSantis. New polls coming out show that Gillum has maybe a 1 or 2 point lead here. Cheryl, are you excited?
We're very excited. It was interesting to watch the election results on the primary election night. We had a gathering at our headquarters. We had a lot of people from representing several candidates, and the excitement in the room built. Even people who had not particularly supported Mayor Gillum got excited as it became obvious what was happening. The level of interest in response from Democrats in general has been exciting. When he named Chris King as his running mate, it gave it another shot of adrenaline. So yeah, we think it's going to be an interesting campaign.
Those who didn't support him, did they not support him because they didn't think he could win?
We heard that. We heard that. I was accused of being very idealistic because I said to people, vote for the person you think will make the best governor. Because we heard that question a lot. Who do you think can win in November? And I said to people frequently, vote for the candidate that you think will be the best governor, and that should be the same person.
Martin, did you like the way that the Republican primary turned out, and do you like the Ron DeSantis versus Mayor Gillum?
The question there is an interesting one. Vote for the person that you think would make the best governor. In some ways, the logical vote is vote for the person that you think can win, and I can see why people wouldn't have initially backed Andrew Gillum because of that. As far as DeSantis and Putnam, there were a tremendous amount of people within the establishment that wanted Putnam. He'd put many, many years. It had a lot of good knowledge, but with the Okeechobee and the sugar and the chumming of the water, so to speak, if you'll excuse the pun there, he was dead as soon as Trump put the boot in with his nomination for a support for DeSantis. I think it's a fascinating proposition. What we've got here is two opposite ends of the polls.
What is also fascinating is the impact that this will have on down ballot races. Number one, the U.S. Senate race. People have been very critical of the race that Bill Nelson has been running so far. It seems it's not energetic. Governor Scott has been on television for a long time now. I've heard some pundits say that Bill Nelson may have just been saved by Andrew Gillum.
I think Bill Nelson was probably very happy when he realized that he was going to be able to move with the momentum of Andrew Gillum. We're hearing that Senator Nelson is going to become much more obvious, much more prominent now that it's in the general election status. I am a Democrat who believes he needs to be. He needs to become more visible and more outspoken. But I do think that the Gillum candidacy gave him a boost as well. It also excited him.
Right. And Martin, whether you're talking about the U.S. Senate race or races for Congress or even down to the state rep and state Senate races, does the governor's race have an impact on all these races that are taking place here on the Suncoast?
I think it has the potential to mobilize. It's ironic. We're talking about blue wave and blue tsunami. It may be an unintended consequence of having a progressive, so-called candidate, that it mobilizes more Republicans. You know, the indifference to the polls and the fact that in Sarasota County more Democrats came out and voted proportionally than the Republicans at the primary has worried the Republican Party, and rightly so. I think Andrew Gillum might excite the Democrat base. I think he might do exactly the same for the Republicans.
You seem to be saying that Republicans have something to be concerned about here.
Oh, absolutely. There's no question. I mean, it's a two-horse race. There's no question that every Republican has to realize that if they don't get out and if they don't vote, there's every chance that Andrew Gillum, mayor of Tallahassee, most crime-ridden city in Florida, becomes the governor.
I see that we are just warming up. We have to take a quick break, and we'll be back for final thoughts in a moment. Stay with us. And our guests join us right now for final thoughts, and let's drill all the way down to the race for U.S. Congress. Cheryl, David Shapiro put out a poll that his campaign did last week showing that he's within just a couple of points of Vern Buchanan. You have to keep in mind that is a campaign poll and not a public poll. But how would you stack the odds for this race?
I think it's a winnable race for Democrats. I think we know that it's still a challenge, that we are outnumbered in registrations. But when we look at the results in the primary, in the races that did have a Republican against a Democrat, Democrats polled very well in both Manatee County and Sarasota County. I think I used to say that the most common question I got was, who are you going to run against Vern Buchanan? And people are excited about David Shapiro's candidacy and are very interested in getting him elected.
Martin, around the entire country, Republican incumbents who won their last election by 20-odd points are going down for defeat in special elections. They're very concerned now. But I did know this, if you know the website 538, it still says that Vern Buchanan has, a 7-in-1 chance of winning this race.
Oh, I think that's probably about right. He's a 6-term congressman. He's got a lot more money to play with. He's got a personal fortune substantial if things get tight. Frankly, I'm not here to tell the Democrats how to run things, but a personal injury lawyer, not necessarily a middle-aged, not necessarily a candidate that I get the warm and fuzzies for if I'm a progressive. I think Vern Buchanan wins.
Do you get one for a used car salesman? We could certainly play that game.
Well, you could.
But to you, Alan, I would say the polls didn't give Andrew Gillum a shot either, and the polls locally didn't give Reverend Golden a shot in Manatee County. So things are very different in this cycle.
What does this campaign get down to? Does it get down to the national mood, or does it get down to local issues? Because to date, I really have not seen either candidate really stake out bold moves, bold issues in terms of this particular race.
Vern does have very good support, fairly broad support locally. 12 years in Congress, a long time. I think it's very difficult. Locally, I just haven't seen an awful lot of energy yet from the Shapiro campaign. That's a long way to come from. I think 7-to-1's about fair handicapping.
Vern has tried to reinvent himself for this cycle, though. He is a different candidate and a different personality than he has been in previous races. We heard President Trump say maybe the red wave was coming, but the red tide's already here. And Vern and Rick Scott and a lot of the Republicans are going to have to take responsibility for that. And it's up to us to point that out to the voters, that there are local issues, and that's certainly a paramount one.
And Martin, you get the last word.
Well, he's got that big boat, so the red tide shouldn't terribly bother him. I don't think we can lay that one on. Wow.
Why don't we just leave it there? Okay. Thank you both. But before we go, we want to share with you what some of viewers said about last night's show on the Bradenton-based Centerstone, which is one of the area's premier mental health facilities. But 2 suicides are raising a lot of questions. They are separate cases, but among the questions, Centerstone's protocols for checking in on suicidal patients, specifically where the 2 men who took their own lives checked on every 15 minutes per policy. Rosemarie says, I don't understand how not one person could check on someone for 9 hours. That's horrible. No person should ever die of suicide in a mental health facility. Denise says, I am really sorry for the pain and anguish the surviving families are probably going through, but in spite of their best help, no one can control another person's decision, thus preventing their deaths. Rosemarie responding, many people have very successful lives. This was a tragedy due to the lack of supervision. Well, if you'd like to join the conversation on tonight's topic, just visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/mysuncoast.com.abc7. We want to thank our guests for being here tonight, Cheryl Wilson and Martin Hyde, for joining us.